Thanks, everyone, and thanks for being here for this session. What a really opportune moment to talk with two really distinguished guests about targets, ambition, rules, and where we stand. I mean, just to set some of the context here, if we think about 2024, record heat that meant the planet exceeded the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature threshold on an annual basis for the first time. We've seen dozens of banks, of asset managers, of other sectors of the finance industry leave their associations that have aimed at setting standards around climate action. We've had airlines, companies from Walmart to Coca-Cola back away from their targets around emissions reduction and other environmental action. So plenty on the depressing side of the ledger, but yet we're still seeing an energy transition that in this region in particular in Asia is attracting huge amounts of capital. Energy transition investment topped $2 trillion in 2024, according to our colleagues at Bloomberg NEF. And just this month we saw, as I think we'll come to talk about, the International Court of Justice issue an advisory opinion reminding countries of their responsibilities when it comes to that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. So with that, let's talk about that current climate North Star, the Paris Agreement's main goal of limiting warming to well below 2 degrees, and I'm paraphrasing, but preferably to 1.5 degrees. Is it still achievable? Have we blown past it? And if we have blown past it, why have we? I'm going to come to Christina first. Christina.
Right, really tough question. But if I could just maybe start with this. Innovation and action never happens with realism. And if it did, if we did rely on realism, humankind wouldn't have evolved, the way we did, and technology wouldn't have evolved. I'm not saying we should be delusional, but if we keep moving the goalpost, move away from 1.5, then we'll keep moving that goal next time, the time after that, and the time after that. So, and just because if we have moved past 1.5, doesn't mean we shouldn't still aim for it. I think we should still aim for it. We just need to understand what went wrong, what failed. We need to fix it, and we need to accelerate quickly.
Winston, before I come to you, I mean, when we think about what has gone wrong, briefly, I mean, what are some of the failures that you've observed?
Right. So I would say that financial markets, I mean, I've got two reasons, but I would say the first one is that financial markets are still pricing for delay. And one reason for that, in our opinion, is the lack of policy clarity. So we've got signals from governments and regulators that are often vague or permissive. And let me take an example. So I think most of you would have heard of Japan's Green Transformation Plan, the GX plan. It's a really bold, really ambitious plan for financing industrial transformation. From a climate finance perspective, I have questions. So, are companies, are sovereigns are allowed to raise transition bonds or green bonds without any fossil phase down requirements? What are the near-term emission reduction targets? Near-term, not long-term.
Yep.
So those are the questions that really make me question, like, are our climate finance frameworks really geared for that science-aligned framework? But Japan is not the only one. I mean, I'm seeing across Asia a divergence. The market is fragmented when it comes to policy setting and financing. We go from a really good taxonomy, sustainable finance taxonomies, for example, in Singapore has one of the most science-aligned taxonomies, to others where they're still allowing new coal, new gas projects, maybe unabated, we don't know because it's so unclear, to be financed under the transition label.
Yeah.
So that sort of signaling to the market is really problematic.
Let's come back to what we can do to address some of those points, but to the main question, is 1.5 dead? And if it is, why? Winston?
Thanks. First, agree totally with what Christina has said about the issues driving why we've crossed 1.5. I would be a bit more forceful in maybe attributing the failures to governance, policies, and lack of ambition, but it's also noting that businesses follow what governments dictate. So thank you for articulating that. Now to your question, is 1.5 dead? No, it's not. It's just a target, it's a metric. I would like to paraphrase from the person I was named after, Winston Churchill, about his saying about democracy. It's the worst form of government except all others. Similarly, 1.5 is a target. It's the worst form of target, but can you think of an alternative? The answer is no. We need something that is clear, that people are familiar with. But the lesson is that 1.5 is not the end of it. So if we look at last year, you mentioned one of the metrics, one of the temperature databases went above 1.5, but there are about 4 or 5 others that still are below 1.5 for now. The IPCC has sort of projected that by early 2030s or thereabouts, all the other databases will consistently be above 1.5 for the entire year. So we still have that little bit of wiggle room. But I think some of the messaging is a bit mistaken. It's not that we passed 1.5, we're dead in the water. No, the science has shown that, or the assessment of the science has shown that if we go to net zero by 2050, there is still a chance of us peaking and coming back down to 1.5 or below by the end of the century. So that sort of information is also useful to tell people there is still hope to actually get back down to something of a livable world if we get our act together, integrate science-based policy, integrate the business frameworks, the information from taxonomies, the education of executives in this room today and students in the future to align ourselves, to align our action together to get us back to that 1.5 target by the end of this century.
That's a positive outlook on the conundrum. Let's see if the audience also agree, and you've heard from our panelists on their view about the target, but we want to understand what you think. So if we can go to our first poll, if that's possible.
My bet is everybody will say no.
And as you can see, the question is the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal still a useful target for business and finance specifically? And hopefully, if you can vote, we'll see those results. Okay, well, while we're waiting for those results to come in, I'm not going to presuppose the outcome, but if, hypothetically, if we were designing a new system of targets and standards from here, or if we accept that a new metric, a new goal is necessary, how do we approach that? Is a temperature-based threshold the right metric? Are there other factors that we should be considering? What would a useful new climate goal, a rallying point for ambition look like? Winston, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, sure. I would say just use 1.5 and tailor it for your own purpose. That would be the easiest way forward. To get everyone, to get all 195 countries in the UN framework to actually agree to 1.5 was a massive undertaking. And if you want to come up with a new metric, it's going to take a very long time for agreement, especially in this day and age of uncertainty. So my suggestion, use that, work with scientists like myself or colleagues who are familiar with what the implications are for risk, what the implications are on how you can reduce your emissions, both from the mitigation side, but from the risk side in terms of adaptation. One can do that. That would be my suggestion as a sort of a preferred way forward, as opposed to coming up with something new that might, in the end, lead to a more uncertain, more confused world, and also give the opportunities of people who are for delay, for denial, for contrarianism, to muddy the waters and reduce the initiative, reduce the momentum for any sort of action.
I think there's some broad support in the room. We can see, 41% of those of you who responded, thinks it is still a useful target. But we can see here, and maybe this is a point to come on to, that there's a view clearly, and I think a lot of people share this, that one broad target for the globe that's not differentiated for every industry sector maybe isn't the most useful way of organizing progress on climate action. Christina, you mentioned some of the pitfalls we've seen with attempts to meet 1.5 degrees. Is that a way to go? To allow sectors, regions, countries to have that differentiated responsibilities and progress?
Yeah, I would say no matter how we kind of look at whether we're looking at regional or sectoral perspective, what's really important is that, so going back to that question that you asked Winston as well, whether we are staying with 1.5 or if we're moving to a new target, I agree with Winston, we should stay with 1.5. But even if either way, we just need better compass, better compasses. We need better roadmaps. At the moment we have this 2050, everyone was really rushing out and really latching on to that 2050 target. But no one knew what they're going to do the next 5 years. Where is that map, that maps out your 20, 30 years of journey? If we don't know what we're going to be doing in 5 or 10 years, that is why we are are missing the 1.5 pathway. So yeah, I think short-term accountability, mid-term accountability is extremely important if we are going to be setting that new standard.
And as standards evolve, or if we look to new standards, do they need to be broader in scope? Do they need to look to other elements of the transition, whether that is the climate justice, whether that's impact on communities? The goals as they're described now are pretty solidly targeted at, holding temperatures back and in a sense emissions reduction. It's a broader story about sustainability and about the climate transition. Would you favour sort of a wider view and a wider lens on what ambition and what targets should be?
I think the 1.5 is, in terms of the temperature goal, it's just one of the benchmarks, and it's really just there for us to aim. Everything else should be aligned. And so yes, maybe after having that temperature goal, we should be looking at what different sectors would look like when they actually move to that 1.5. But again, I still think that it's that accountability. Instead of maybe kind of supporting or supplementing that temperature goal, we need to be asking, if we are at 0 gigawatts of clean energy today, in some parts of Asia, almost zero, in 2 years' time, can we get to 1 gigawatt? And that is, I think, the kind of benchmarks that we really need to be asking and giving ourselves as a target, instead of just, latching on to that temperature.
Not quite.
Winston, can I quickly add on?
Please,
Yes.
absolutely.
So this will be a good time to bring in the sort of issue that was raised last week with the International Court of Justice, and it helps to inform this discussion about using 1.5. So in the ruling that came out last Wednesday, and I was in Kenya with a whole bunch of IPCC authors working on a special report, we looked at it and said, wow, everything in there, the science basis came from what we worked on in AR6. And they put it front and center that 1.5 is a North Star, if not the North Star, and it helps to broaden the discussion now that since they've concluded that countries can be liable for climate justice issues, for punitive action against industries in the fossil fuel sector, to open themselves up for possible reparations for climate loss, separate from climate losses and damages. This adds on to the equation for businesses, for companies, for countries, within countries as well, to do proper due diligence. That if we know we'll stick to 1.5 and look into that. The hope is that when doing your due diligence for managing your transition, for looking out for how to finance for adaptation or mitigation, the game is changed with this ruling in the sense that now you can expect potential litigations to happen, and it's a big concern for that. You have to watch out for that. And this sort of acceleration of the momentum from the legal side would help with the business sort of impetus towards climate adaptation and mitigation, which we hope can help address the consequences of exceeding 1.5.
Yeah, quite. You mentioned quite aptly the IPCC work that you've done, and obviously you are a co-chair of one of the working groups since 2023. I guess I'm interested to ask you in the context of the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. We've seen the US withdraw funding for the IPCC process and the departure of some very eminent scientists and colleagues of yours. When you look to this cycle and to the next report, are there risks to that work? Are there, how serious are the downsides to the work of the IPCC?
Apart from premature graying of my hair, I would say a lot. We need the US contribution. A lot of very good scientists are based there that can help inform the process. Particularly in this cycle, we are, for the first time in my working group in 32 years, we have a chapter on finance. A chapter specifically looking at adaptation finance, losses and damages, how that can inform potential governmental frameworks, which can have secondary impacts on the business community, both within the countries and operating across countries as well. That sort of insight will not be complete if we are omitting the contributions from the US towards the assessment, as well as in supporting the IPCC and the UNFCCC framework.
Yeah, quite. And when we think about that broader absence of US climate leadership, are there opportunities for countries in this region, for organizations in this region? Christina, thinking beyond just the IPCC, can Southeast Asia step up more as the US has withdrawn?
Well, maybe it's a good time for me to maybe share a really positive thing that's happening in the policy world, and that is, I think about a couple of weeks ago, we heard that Singapore MAS and China PBOC are collaborating on assessing how their transition taxonomies can harmonize better. Now, they've already done that on the green taxonomy. Now it's that sticky, tricky taxonomy bit that just can be fungible. So and I think that in a world, like you said, in a world where standards are backsliding or taking a back seat, I think that's something really positive. To see that Singapore and China are actually trying to make really good progress on this, and that shows leadership in a way.
Quite. That's a positive note, probably to end on. I guess we approach this session. Do we need a new climate North Star? The view of our speakers is no. I guess we need to do a better job of aiming for the one we've got. There's a lot more that can be done to try and achieve the target that is already in place. Look, if you can join me in thanking our speakers, Christina Ang, Winston Chow. Thanks very much.